Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the virtual book launch for Duluth, an Urban Biography, the newest book by Minnesota Historical Society Press. I'm its author, Tony Dierckins, coming to you live from the world headquarters of Zenith City Press at the Chester Park neighborhood in beautiful Duluth, Minnesota this evening. Our book launch was originally scheduled to be at Glensheen tonight, so I want to thank Dan Hartman and his crew for extending that offer. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it there. Glensheen is closed. I'm home. You're all home because we're all trying to flatten this curve and do the right thing by staying inside and keeping this pandemic in check. So thanks everybody for showing up tonight, watching me on Facebook. I hope everybody in your home and you are well. I really appreciate the support. So let's get going. If you've ever been to a book launch before, you know that this is kind of the event where the author, after months of sitting home by himself in his small room, typing at the computer, finally gets to go out in the public and show off his book, and the publisher announce and get the book out to the public for the first time. And here I am stuck behind the same computer. So I'm glad you're all there. Usually at the end of these events, I've done some talking, I've read from the book, and everybody gets a signed copy as they leave. Tonight, if you want a signed copy, you can go to zenithcity.com and order that. If you're in Duluth and had planned to go to Glensheen tonight, then you've got a pickup option where you can order the book, avoid the shipping charge, and pick it up off my porch. If signed copies aren't that big of a deal for you, then I know that, I don't know which other retailers in Duluth are open, but I know that Zenith Bookstore in West Duluth is fulfilling orders and delivering curbside. So you can try getting a book from them there. Now, I also I have to point out one more anniversary on this night, December. It's April 15th, and it is the 11th anniversary of the first date I had with my wife, Hollis. So if you've got a beverage at home, this is to Holly, who's a great person to spend in quarantine with. Holly. This, of course, is a local beverage brewed by one of our many wonderful Duluth breweries here. So here's the deal. I'm going to talk to you about for 10 minutes, talk to you about the book a little, even read the brief prologue that starts the book. While I'm doing that, if you have questions about the book, about anything in Duluth history, please type them in the comments. Facebook Live, you've seen these things in the past few weeks. It takes a little lag time for them to scroll through. So please ask your questions now, and hopefully I'll scroll through. It won't be too awkward as we go here, and I'll answer your questions as we go. So let's begin. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Tony Dierckins. I'm a Duluth writer. I'm also the publisher of Zenith City Press, where we publish books that celebrate historic Duluth and Western Lake Superior. We also celebrate online at zenithcity.com, where we have an archive of over 1,000 stories in 8 different categories, a lot of them pulled from our books, a lot of them written by myself and other great Duluth history enthusiasts for 5 years when we ran the website like a magazine. So we've got all that for you, and you can come follow us on Facebook or sign up for your daily email, This Day in Duluth History. You get 200 word history every morning in your inbox to keep up on things like that. So that's who we are and what we do. I want to talk to you about the book now, and I'm going to start by thanking the people that made this possible, and no one deserves more thanks than the woman to whom the book is dedicated, and that is my dear late friend, Mary Ann C. Norton. Those of you in Duluth who are lucky enough to know Mary Ann know that she spent the last 30 years of her life volunteering at the Duluth Public Library in the reference department, helping individuals trace Duluth history or their own family histories. Before that, she was a director of the St. Louis County Historical Society and a lifetime educator. I met Mary Ann a little over 15 years ago. I had found these wonderful postcard collectors in Duluth that had these great old lithographic postcards, and I wanted to make a book. I thought, hey, I could make a color history book. The trouble was, at the time, I didn't know anything about Duluth history. And I went to the library, and the reference librarians introduced me to Mary Ann. And she not only helped me research the book, but her knowledge of Duluth history and her passion for it was so infectious that I like to say I walked into that library as a writer without a subject. And after meeting Mary Ann, I had more stories than I can tell in a lifetime. And I know so many of them are stuffed into this book that I think you'll enjoy. Other people that helped, if you go back in the back of the book, there's an author's note. And there's a whole paragraph that lists about 3, 4, 5 dozen people who have helped in some small or large way with this book, either helping me find images, answering a simple question, helping me find someone else who had an answer to a question, others that sat down and talked with me for lengths of time to get to know the aspects, the issues that would be important for a book like this. I learned a lot from writers like Heidi Bach Hansen and Anthony Bush and Jim Heffernan, who wrote for me on Xena City Line for those years. Friends like John Schwetman, who helped me understand, for instance, John with the controversial Red Plan with our education department about 10 years ago, helping me understand that so I could write about it fairly and objectively. All these people contribute to it. Doesn't matter whose name is on the cover of the book, a lot of people put work into it. None more than Ann Regan. Ann is the editor-in-chief of Minnesota Historical Society Press. She approached me about this book in the first place. She's been just wonderful. She and Shannon Pennyfeather, the managing editor, really helped me wrestle my words, get this into shape, because we're covering a lot of ground in very little space. So it was a challenge. And I want to thank them for their help. And now the marketing department, Allison and her crew at the press, for helping out today. Because this is different for me. Those of you who know my work know that I publish it. I do the design. I write most or half or all of the book. I usually get these experts like Nancy Nelson on parks or Pete Kluwer on beer. Mary Ann helped with our Lost Duluth book and write these. This book was the idea of Minnesota Historical Society Press. They're doing a series of these 4 urban biographies on Minnesota's largest cities: Duluth, Rochester, my hometown of St. Paul, and Minneapolis. Minneapolis book, I think, is coming out in just a month or two. So that's something to look forward to. And I was very honored that Ann asked me to write the Duluth book. I was very pleased that Duluth is the first book in this series to come out, and that it's coming out in 2020. Those of you that follow me online know that 1870 is Duluth's 150th anniversary of first becoming a city, so it's a great, appropriate time for the book to come out as well. So I want to tell you more about that book. It is indeed an urban biography, and by that, what we're trying to do is tell the story of the municipality, the place called Duluth, as much of its history as possible in as few words as possible. And this book, I like to joke that it covers the whole gambit. We go back 2.6 billion years till the Precambrian lava flows that formed the bed of Lake Superior, all through 2019 in November, when Mayor Larson was reelected to a second term. That whole span of time within the book, we follow it. We start with the discussion of the native peoples that were here before, because this convergence where Lake Superior meets the St. Louis River has been attracting people for thousands and thousands of years. Duluth is just the latest incarnation of the groups that have called this place home. So once we get to 1856, which is pretty quick, we focus on the book. We follow it decade by decade. We kind of follow the mayors along as a device to keep things moving, cover its booms and busts, its growth and development, the major events that shaped and formed Duluth. But you're not going to find an academic book. This isn't written for scholars. It's a very conversational tone. There's no footnotes or endnotes if you're worried about that. And for those my friends who I know don't read, there's 45 pictures as well. So I know you'll enjoy that. But we also get the time and space to discuss some of the idiosyncrasies of Duluth, the things that I feel make Duluth Duluth. The difference between the West End and West Duluth, giving directions in a town that doesn't sit square on the map, predicting the weather here. Duluthians and their contributions to pop culture, which have been myriad. At the same time, Duluth has been disparaged by pop culture as well. We talk about that. Of course, our famous aerial bridge and canal, our remarkable park system, our wonderful architectural heritage while it lasts. Some things that are rather uncomfortable, like the lynchings we had in 1918 and 1920 here in Duluth, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan here in the 1920s, the killings at Glensheen. Various things about Duluth that really make Duluth Duluth, even its east-west divide, even its rocky relationship with Superior. So with that, just about to get to your questions, but what I want to do first is read to you the prologue of the book. This is just an introductory statement, a paragraph before the whole rest of the book starts, and I hope it sets a tone for you and gives you a little taste along the way. And then we'll get to your questions. So here we go. Duluth, Minnesota sits perched at the western tip of the Great Lakes, running 28 miles along the northern shorelines of Lake Superior and its largest tributary, the St. Louis River. Waterways that have profoundly shaped the city, not just geographically, but economically and culturally as well. By the 1700s, the natural harbor they formed provided a home for Ojibwe residents. In the mid-1800s, as the nation expanded westward, that harbor attracted those who saw its future as a great shipping center. The name Duluth, chosen to commemorate an ambitious and often arrogant 17th century French soldier who once portaged over a sandbar separating the lake and river, first appears on maps in 1856. Its strategic position and the surrounding region's abundant natural resources would help Duluth ride out dramatic economic ebbs and flows created by waves of panic, depression, and recession. Once a railroad arrived, wharves and docks blossomed along the bay, soon joined by warehouses, factories, and mills. Upstream, the river's currents later turned turbines, producing the electricity that powered industry. Beyond acting as an anchorage for manufacturing and trade, the lakes and rivers' waters also provided food and offered endless recreational opportunities and natural beauty that have persistently drawn visitors to their shores. But those waters carried challenge and conflict as well, leaving little room to develop infrastructure, fueling a feud with Duluth's neighbor across the bay, and creating a geographic split that to this day divides the city economically and politically. And so the story of Duluth begins and continues where the lake and the river converge. And that's where we follow the story, how the lake and the river really shape Duluth. And I think that's a good point to start answering some questions here. So if you don't mind, while I scroll down here, thanks for all the well wishes, folks, I'm seeing here. Very nice to have you, some familiar faces along the way and old friends. Lovely to see. Let me see here if we got a question. Kathy Joan Ponder. Hi, Kathy JP. How many years have I lived in Duluth? I first came to Duluth in 1984 as a college student, 3 years after I finished high school. Stayed for my 4 or 5 years it took me, and back in 1988 I moved away. Came back in 91 for graduate school. Left in 94. Briefly spent some time in Roseau, Minnesota. And then it was time to leave there. And I didn't know where else to go. And I was drawn back to Duluth. So I've lived in Duluth off and on since 1984. I've really been a Duluth resident since 1996. That's when I first felt I wasn't just a college student passing through town and really got to know and love Duluth. Thanks for the question. We have any more questions? Oh, Elizabeth Aimley. What was something you wish you could have included more about? Was there anything you wanted to cover but couldn't find enough information about? Great question. I always want to write, if you've read my other books before, you know they're really deep dives in particular subjects. So I always, and if you've talked to me before, you always know I've got more to say about something then I get a chance to say. And you know, I'm glad you guys can't comment live back at me when I say things like that. But I wish I could have talked longer about certain things, had more fun, had more chance to introduce you to some of the individuals along the way. I got to get into a bunch of them. There wasn't anything I wanted to cover, but really couldn't find enough information about. The toughest thing was the most recent 25 years. As I've lived here as a resident, I've been involved with some issues about parks and preservation, and it was like standing in the middle of a forest, and every tree looked equally important. It was really tough to decide which issues to write about, because, you know, without the filter of time, which of these issues are still going to be important 10, 15, 20 years from now. Things we think are important today might just be footnotes. Things we're barely paying attention to right now might turn out to be paramount down the road. So that was really hard, and that's when I turned to a lot of friends to get help on that. So thanks a bunch for that. Some nice comments. How did Gary New Duluth areas get their names? Richie Townsend. Hi, Richie. Thanks a bit for the question. I really appreciate that. New Duluth was named first. New Duluth developed in around 1890. They attracted a metal manufacturing company that set up at the end of Commonwealth Avenue and formed New Duluth. And then there was a panic of 1893, and that business was shuttered for a while. It didn't reopen for some time. And then U.S. Steel came in and started building. They announced in 1908 they started building their steel plant, and they created two communities for the steel plant. One was Morgan Park, named for J.P. Morgan, the founder of U.S. Steel. And this was where the highly skilled supervisors of Protestant backgrounds were housed initially. And then the lesser skilled employees that were Catholics, immigrants from Eastern Europe, later African Americans that they recruited from the South, lived in Gary in these barracks that they built there. Gary was actually a portion of New Duluth that was broken off and named for I forget his first name. Mr. Gary is a vice president of U.S. Steel, so it's another company town. He's the same man that Gary, Indiana was named after as well. So hope that answers your question as well. Do we have any more questions queued up that I missed? That's right. And scroll down here. How did I get interested in Duluth history? Dan O'Kane, thanks. Lifetime friend there, who I've known since 7th grade. Dan, tuning in from Portland. Appreciate that. How did I get interested in Duluth history? It's a fascinating subject, but as I referred to earlier, you know, it was curious to me. I had done a little book about locally owned businesses and things to do up here, and folks I found out some little trivia things that I added to the book, like, did you know the lift bridge didn't always lift? It was a ferry bridge before that, little things like that, and I got interested. And somebody said, you know, you got to look at these postcards that Jerry Paulson and Bob Swanfeld and others have, and you got to do a book. And like I said before, I didn't know about it. I met Mary Ann Norton at the library, and she got me going on it. Duluth history, if you haven't read any of it, it's fascinating. It's these incredible stories of perseverance and getting up off the mat time and time again. In fact, I want to read you a description from 1949 of Duluth. This is a guy named, his name was Baum. He wrote for the Saturday Evening Post. He did this big, long history describing Duluth in 1949 for the Saturday Evening Post. This is the time when everybody got magazines all the time. And this is from his description of it. And we include this in the book. I like to read other people's descriptions of the book, especially throughout time, because it's fun to look back. So here we go. This is from Mr. Baum in 1949. The city of Duluth lies at the most westerly point of the largest unsalted sea in the world, Lake Superior, a fluid deity which the city worships to a man. At its sharp western nose, where it is fed by the St. Louis River, is the very headwaters of all the Great Lakes, 603 feet above the ocean. Some of the oldest known rock on earth rears up on the north or Minnesota side of the bay, river, and lake. For some unaccountable reason, Duluth has plastered itself against this rocky bluff with only a spatter of beach and a couple of sand spits for footing. It is consequently a long, skinny city, a sort of ripsaw blade with smooth edge to the water and teeth sticking up into the rocks wherever it finds a grudging crevice. Like the Dachshund, Duluth is a city and a half long and a tenth of a city wide. 26 miles from one end to the other, its average width is only 1/10 of its length, yet it covers more area than Boston, St. Louis, or Pittsburgh. Across the river and inner bay, behind a 9-mile sandbar, there is a perfectly logical place for the city. In fact, one is there, Superior, Wisconsin. That Duluth, rather than develop in comfort on the grassy flats where Superior lies, chose to buck the unlikely cliffs on the North Shore is quite in character. Duluth's history is a long series of counterpunches at circumstances and events. When Duluth wins a round, it habitually comes up off the canvas to do it. I just love that description of Duluth. Duluth suffered so many booms and busts in its early history. That image of it as a prize fighter getting off the mat, I just love it. Any other questions that we have geared up at this point? A lot of kind words, folks. Really appreciate it. Nicholas, what are some of the new books Zenith Pretty Press are you working on now? Great question. As I mentioned earlier, I like to collaborate with people to put things together. One of those collaborations is with a gentleman named Jeff Lemke. You got to look up Jeff Lemke Trains or Twin Ports Rail History. Jeff is an old railroad man, retired, makes brass model scale railroads now. There's no one in Duluth or anywhere on the planet that knows more about Twin Ports rail history, and he's got an incredible photo collection. Can't wait to release the book he and I are working on. I have had to put it on the back burner for this one, but Jeff, it's going to be fantastic. Also, a book that Mary Ann and I were slowly, quietly working on in the background. It's still evolving. We were calling it Duluth's Grand Old Buildings. We're thinking of another book called Grand Old Homes. Basically, we've talked about the architecture we've lost with Lost Duluth. We want to talk about the architecture that's still there. But with Lost Duluth, 10 years old now, I might combine the two ideas into an even larger book on Duluth architecture. So that's what I'm working on. Sue Prusak. Hi, Sue. Good to have you here tonight. Sue's asking me, when were the huge underground storm sewers built in Duluth? Have you seen them? She's talking about Duluth's old sewer system, parts of which are being replaced these past 3 years and again this summer in downtown Duluth. They're made of brick. They're these gigantic round things. You can walk standing up in them. A lot of them were first installed in the late 1880s and 1890s. Part of that was replaced in the 1930s thanks to the Works Project Administration and the money we got from the federal government during the Depression. And now we're fixing them again. No, Sue, I haven't been down there, but if you want to look at Duluth's underground, look on Zenith City in our archives. We've got a story about it by Dan Turner. Dan also runs a site called Substreet, where he studied Duluth underground, the tunnels. A lot of our creeks have been run underground here in Duluth to eliminate building bridges every block and a half. So Duluth is a city of creeks. I think there's over 26 of them besides the river feeding the lake from Duluth. So it's a wonderful town for that. So thanks, Sue. That's a great question. Oh, Heidi's on board. Heidi, nice to have you here. Thank you very much. Got a lot of kind words and thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it tonight. It's getting near 7:24. We're going to wait for a few more things to queue up. I'm going to read you another story in the meantime. This is a description of Duluth in 1869. It was published in the Atlantic magazine in 1870. A guy named John Trowbridge took a trip to Duluth as it was just developing. In 1869, in January, we had less than 200 people living in Duluth. Okay, by April of 1870, okay, just over a year or so later, over 3,100. We had this great big boom. Jay Cooke was bringing his railroad to town. All these immigrants were pouring in to start building the railroad. Everything was wood framed, buildings just starting to go up. And Mr. Trowbridge joined a party of Jay Cooke's friends and families and associates. They got themselves to St. Paul. They went on the Lake Superior, Mississippi, its entire railroad for its entire 50 miles. That's all that had been built then. Then they took a rough stagecoach. They got themselves to Fond du Lac at the far western end of what is now Duluth, and got on 2 small steamships and went on the St. Louis River. So they approached Duluth and Minnesota Point from the riverside, not from the lakeside. And this is John Trowbridge's first glimpse of Duluth in 1869. So this is what Duluth looked like just as it was being developed. The first sight, to us shivering on deck, was not particularly cheering. But as we passed into Superior Bay, and the stroke of light from a rift in the clouds fell like a prophetic finger on the little checkered spot brightening in the wilderness, the view became more interesting. The town lies on the lower terraces of wooded hills which rise from the city's water's edge by easy grades to the distant background of a magnificent mountain range, a truly imposing sight to one who can look beyond those cheap wooden frames, the staging whereby the real city will be built, and see the civilization of the future clustering along the shore and hanging upon the benches of that ample amphitheater. The 2 bays were evidently once an open basin of the lake, from which they have been cut off, one after the other, by points of land formed by the action of its waves meeting the current of the river. Between the lake and the bay is Minnesota Point, an enormous bar 7 miles in length, covered by a long procession of trees and bushes which appear to be marching in solid column after their captain, the lighthouse, across the head of the lake toward the land of Wisconsin. It is like a mighty arm thrust down from the north shore to take the fury of Lake Superior storms on one side and to protect the haven thus formed on the other. Seated on the rocky shoulder of this arm, with one foot on the lake, the other on the bay, is the infant city of Duluth. Situated at the western extremity of the grandest lake and river chain in the world, that vast freshwater Mediterranean which reaches from the Gulf of St. Lawrence almost to the center of North America. It required no great degree of sagacity to perceive that here was to be the key to the quarter of the hemisphere, or hereabouts. Wherever was established the practical head of navigation between the northern range of states and the vastly more extensive undeveloped region beyond, there must be another, and perhaps even greater, Chicago. That's what we were supposed to be, a next great Chicago. Jay Cooke brought his railroad to Duluth instead of Superior, and that's why Duluth became the Zenith City of the Unsalted Seas instead of Superior. Any other questions? I'm going to scroll down and look for it. Yeah, here's another one by Nicole. Here's a question. What era was your favorite to research? And nice mention of Marianne. I don't know about my favorite. I'm most comfortable with the period of Duluth from 1856 to about 1839. It's developing, its growth period and everything after that. I'm less schooled on the things that came after that. That's why I say during the last 50 and especially 25 years were the hardest aspects to do on the book. Nicholas Kiproff asks, hi Nick, were you living in Duluth during the Halloween blizzard of 1991? I was. I was a graduate student at the University of Minnesota Duluth, where all my students were happy that freshman composition was canceled for a week or so. I remember neighbors shoveling out. I remember there was a path to the 8th Street Video on 9th Street and to the Shanty Bottle Shop. And that's about all the paths there were, to the liquor store and the video store back then. This is great, folks. Paul Stefan is on there. He wants me to tell the Fremont story. This is a great one. Fremont was a town site platted in the 1850s that's been swallowed up by Duluth. It was down between Minnesota Point and Rice's Point, kind of where the deck is in the William A. Irvin and that parking area down there, right? It was a bunch of marsh, floating islands, marshes and stuff, and people knew that it was eventually going to get filled in and developed, so they platted it as a town site. Well, one of the things that happened when we cut the canal is that the waters of the St. Louis River just didn't have the Superior entry over by the city of Superior to go out of. Now it could flow through the canal. So it shifted the waters in the bay, and a lot of that went floating. In May, I think it was, of 1873, a great big huge storm, and some of the islands broke up and actually went floating through the canal. A couple of guys got in rowboats. One was Walter Van Brunt, who would write a 3-volume history of Duluth and publish it in 1922. Another one was Charles Johnson, who, near and dear to my heart, owned one of the first bookstores in Duluth. And they went out, chased it down in a rowboat, put a flag out there and a banner that read, I think it was first departure from Duluth, May 10th, 1873, hoping, of course, that the land wouldn't become part of Wisconsin or Canada. And then it then dissolved along the beach. So it was done after that. That was the end of Fremont. And that's, now think of that the next time you go down to an event at the deck. That used to be a floating marsh way back when. I think I've got another question here from Elizabeth Ainley, or Only. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, if I mispronounce your name. For a history-loving tourist, after the current situation, when we're all allowed outdoors again, what historic sites are your top recommendations to visit? Oh, there's so many in Duluth. You can't miss Inger Park, Inger Tower. You have to check that out. I have to say this because I wrote the guidebook and I love the place. If you have not been to Glensheen or have not been there in some time, you have to go back. Dan, Melissa Brooks, Ojibwe, Brandon, Brady, the whole staff down there is always working on new ways to show off Glensheen. It's just fabulous. It's so, you know, when I first went to Glensheen for a graduation dinner in the 1980s, I thought it was just some stuffy old house. And after researching and learning about it, it's one of the most remarkable, it is the most remarkable house museum in the country because it still has its own, the original furniture and paintings and everything that were there in 1908, 1909 when the family moved in. So don't miss that. Explore our parks. You'll find history, works projects and CCC projects from the 30s all over throughout our parks. The Irvin's fun to go on. You know, you're going to spend time at Canal Park. Try to get out to the city's western environs. We've got all sorts of parks with trails once they're back open this summer. So come on up. History is everywhere in Duluth, and you'll find lots of it. Adam Hansmeyer, I heard long ago you could once walk across the St. Louis Bay from Duluth to Superior. Is that true? In the winter, when it was iced over, in fact, before we had bridges, you know, we didn't have any bridge to Superior until the 1880s, and then it was a railroad bridge. Not a good way to use a ferry service. You had to pay to be carried by boat between Rice's Point and Connors Point till I think it was 1899 that the interstate bridge was built. But they record that over the winters, often dog teams were used to walk back and forth, or people skated back and forth. There's stories in the 1850s of near drownings, people falling in as well, because it didn't always freeze over. So yeah, you could if it was winter, but there was no contiguous land. Connors Point and Rice's Point never touched. Wisconsin Point, Minnesota Point didn't touch. So have that as well. Jeff Anderson, hi Jeff, wants to know if there's going to be another launch when the clampdown is over. Where can we see it? Thanks, Jeff. Then we got to get out to Jeff's restaurants as well. The Vanilla Bean and the Boathouse, Boathouse, I believe. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, not another book launch like tonight's event, but we're going to do something at Zenith Bookstore once we're back up and open. I've got some presentations worked up, little 25-minute bits. At Zenith, we're going to do Duluth 1870. I'm going to introduce you to what Duluth looked like in 1870, the people who was living here, what was going on, that kind of thing. And then later we're going to have an event with our friends at the bookstore at Fitger's. This one, I call it a dachshund of a town, just like what we read earlier. It's the story of how Duluth was developed, how we came from this small area. The town of Duluth, when it was platted in 1856, went from First Street down to about the DeWitt Sites building, between 3rd Avenue West and 8th, 3rd Avenue East and 8th Avenue West. So that's how small it was. And now it's 27 miles long, anywhere from a mile to 3 miles wide. So it's a whole different thing now. So that's what we're going to talk about there. We'll have other events as well. If your group would like me to come speak, I do public speaking as well. We could talk about the city of Duluth. This is great, folks. I'm getting more questions than I thought I have. Here's one from my buddy Jeff Lemke. What was my biggest joy in completing the project? You know, Ann Reagan, my editor in this, likes to quote another writer who says, books are never really finished, they're abandoned. We could have kept writing this. The first draft of this was 55,000 words. The second draft was 40,000. I think there's about 43 in the finished copy. There's always more I want to do, but the joy of these projects, completing it is bittersweet, right? Because there's always more you want to say. You send it off, you know it's at the printer, you know it's too late, and there's something else you wanted to say, or you wanted to say this just a little bit differently. So there's those anxieties about it, but there is joy in just being done and letting go and having it be done. And in this case, putting it in someone else's hands for once, and not being responsible for the layout and design. The production folks at Minnesota Historical Society Press took care of that for me. So yeah, I think the biggest joy is being done, but at the same time, you know, it's like a veteran missing the war. It's a struggle, it's hard work, it's hard to do, but and sometimes you look back and you want to get back into it, but it's just good to be done, and good to be seeing all these just wonderful comments here. Paul Stepan just said that he ordered the book. Can I get you to sign it? Whenever you order through Zenith City Press, I sign the books. You always we only ship out signed copies, so ordering it through me gets you a signed copy tonight. So yep, I'll take care of that for you, Paul. See another childhood friend, Chuck Hubble, joining us. Chuck, who I've known since kindergarten. Good to see you, my friend. This is great, folks. How are we doing on time? We're kind of running out of questions, so if you want to queue up some more questions before we go, we're already about 10 minutes over. So let me know if I missed any. Allison, do you know if I've missed any questions? You can shoot me a comment there and let me know. But you know, folks, this is great. It's a Wednesday night. We're stuck inside. I can see we got lots of traffic, lots of great familiar faces. The book again, Duluth, an Urban Biography. You can go find out more about it. Like I said, if you don't want a signed copy, try buy it through Bob and Angel at Zenith Books. Support your local history. When you get back outside there, go to some local history attractions. Be a tourist in your own town, Duluthians, and everybody joining us from outside Duluth. I urge you to come visit when we're all allowed to go back outside again. So we're 10 minutes over. I'm going to sign off now. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Stay well, stay safe, and I got to tell you, I really appreciate the support. Thank you so much.